Welcome, everybody. Thank you for hanging in there with us while we got started. I'm very happy that the library is helping host this event. We will be speaking about the restoration for the Grizzly Creek fire, and we have different organizations here today to tell us about their processes and plans.
Great, thanks very much, Alex, and thanks everyone who's attending this evening. Although we can't meet in person, we're all very excited to tell you about what has been going on in the Grizzly Creek burn area since the fire ignited on August 10th of last year. 10 days later, on the 20th of last August, Roaring Fork Outdoor Volunteers, the organization that I'm representing this evening, launched the Glenwood Canyon Restoration Alliance as a vehicle to coordinate between other nonprofits, government agencies, and local businesses. And as we're kicking off our season of restoration, we wanted to take the time this evening to invite the community into the restoration work that has already been done and will continue to be done in 2021 and the years to come. The Grizzly Creek fire was a singular event, but restoration is going to be part of our community's identity for years to come. Everyone here on the call has been working very hard to make that restoration both possible and successful. And we're looking forward both to telling you what it is we've done and inviting questions. Presentations will last from about 6 p.m. this evening to 7 p.m. And then we're happy to take questions following from 7 to 7:30. With that in mind, everyone does have some slides this evening. And Lisa, if you wouldn't mind sharing your screen and slides, I'll go ahead and get started with a presentation about what Roaring Fork Outdoor Volunteers has done to date and will be doing in this project season. Let's see, Lisa, if you wouldn't mind sharing your screen and slides. Great, thanks so much. So I'm going to be presenting about Roaring Fork Outdoor Volunteers this evening. Our service area includes Pitkin, Eagle, Garfield, and Gunnison counties. And if you wouldn't mind moving to the next slide, please. Oops. I'd just like to explain a little bit about us to begin with. And as I like to joke, every word in our name is a little bit of a misnomer. As you might understand, most of the Grizzly Creek burn area is actually outside of the Roaring Fork Valley. But as a nonprofit stewardship organization, we also create stewardship trail work and restoration projects from Hanging Lake all the way down to Parachute. And really, as we've learned in a time of pandemic, the outdoors doesn't have to be wilderness. The outdoors is anywhere that's just not indoors. And although volunteers is in our name, I am part of a small staff. We rely on the help of community members to accomplish our stewardship work on an annual basis. Finally, I'll just say that if you know about us, you might know about us from building or maintaining trails. But all the work that we're doing outdoors, whether that's restoring a burned landscape or other sorts of stewardship work, is really a means to an end. And the end is to create a community of involved citizens to better understand the decisions that land management agencies make and how our outdoors can be shared. That is the point of stewardship. If you go to the next slide, please. And I'll just mention, as you can see, what really supports the most recent strategic plan that RFOV completed in December of last year are these 4 qualities: land, stewardship, community, and education. What we most want to accomplish is, yes, restoration of the Grizzly Creek burn area, but importantly, we want for the community to get involved and to participate in that restoration. If we think about trail users, the goal of RFOV is to turn those trail users into trail participants. And we hope to do that with all of our projects on the ground in the Grizzly Creek burn area, starting on May 22nd. Next slide, please. So I'd like to talk about the Glenwood Canyon Restoration Alliance. Roaring Fork Outdoor Volunteers is an incorporated nonprofit, as are some of the others on the call this evening. The Glenwood Canyon Restoration Alliance is not itself an incorporated organization. It is a vehicle to encourage collaboration, as I mentioned previously, between other nonprofits, government agencies, and local businesses and citizens. We recognize that the community of persons who are interested in Roaring Fork Outdoor Volunteers, for example, may also be interested in restoring the Grizzly Creek burn area. But almost certainly, just because of the importance of Hanging Lake and other recreational opportunities in Glenwood Canyon, as well as its economic and emotional importance, the community of persons that are interested in restoring Glenwood Canyon is much more expansive, locally, regionally, and statewide. And so Glenwood Canyon Restoration Alliance really hopes to encourage anyone who might have an interest in restoration to become involved in our community building, our community education, and our community-led restoration events. Additionally, I'll just say that because restoring a burn area is so complex and involves so many different aspects of restoration, it's important to have an alliance like the Glenwood Canyon Restoration Alliance to make collaboration possible and to create different points of entry for different persons. So everyone on the town hall tonight is, in a way, participating in the restoration of Glenwood Canyon. Learning about restoration and learning about the fire offers more opportunities to get engaged. You don't have to swing a pickaxe for 6 hours on a Saturday repairing one of our trails to be part of the restoration effort. And the Glenwood Canyon Restoration Alliance is making that possible. Next slide, please. Here's an overview of the former partners that are working, as well as many of our affiliates that are on the call tonight, like Xcel Energy and the Colorado Department of Transportation. Everyone has their own niche. Roaring Fork Outdoor Volunteers really focuses on the landscape and on stewardship education, whereas you'll hear from the Middle Colorado Watershed Council later on, a focus really, again, on education, but also on the water aspects of the burn area. All of our different partners are proud to be interacting with restoration in different ways. We really think that there's unity through diversity. Next slide, please. And so what now I'd like to talk about is the activities that Roaring Fork Outdoor Volunteers will have in the burn area for participants, for citizens like you and I in calendar year 2021. Next slide, please. The programs that you see listed here on the slide are a huge, really comprise all of what Roaring Fork Outdoor Volunteers is going to be offering. Community projects are open to all ages, abilities, and backgrounds. These are opportunities in the Hanging Lake drainage, in the Grizzly Creek drainage, and in the No Name drainage for people to get engaged on a Saturday or Sunday in everything from stabilizing hillsides to repairing trails to heavy-duty rock work. Our group projects are about 90% of the work that we accomplish on the ground, arranged for different business groups, civic groups, youth groups, and faith groups. And these also will be in the 3 affected drainages. Our Adopt a Trail program offers different organizations the opportunity through either financial or volunteer commitments to enhance one of the affected trails. Community education is particularly important to us because, as I said earlier, we really want to turn trail users into trail participants. Along with other Glenwood Canyon Restoration Alliance partners, we'll be leading a hike, bike, and raft series through the burn area, providing public lectures as we did earlier in the spring, setting up at popular trailheads on the weekends to learn about trail users, educate them about stewardship, and offer them opportunities to get involved, working with the Garfield County Public Library District to create both community exhibitions and community archives. And finally, our Young Stewards program provides opportunities for those that are less than 18 years of age to get engaged both in learning academically and in service learning opportunities. Our Adventure Stewards program is a 2-week summer camp in the burn area that combines both high adventure opportunities like rafting and rock climbing, as well as on the ground stewardship education. Next slide, please. The first goal that we have in Roaring Fork Outdoor Volunteers this year is to build community. And what I mean by that is to shape shared understandings so that we can understand not just what's being done in 2021, but what might happen and will be done in the years to come. Restoration could be a 7 to 10 year process, and we want to include the community as much as possible in our efforts. Our Partners in Renewal program is thinking creatively about ways to engage local businesses, both small and large, in volunteer opportunities and also other ways that their business can directly engage in the enriching experience of restoration. Next slide, please. Our second goal is community education, and this really runs the gamut. It can be anything from working with local guide services to help their employees better educate visitors on the facts of the burn area, to creating both permanent and temporary signage for the burn area up and down the canyon. We're thinking on a much longer time frame with community education, not just what we can do in 2021, but what we can also do in the years to come, recognizing that education will be able to inform residents and visitors about the fire that happened and also the potential side effects of that fire in the next decade. Next slide, please. Our final goal for 2021 is community engaged restoration. And just to think about the icons that you see there on the right-hand side, Roaring Fork Outdoor Volunteers is proud to offer events that feature trail work, restoration, and fire adaptation. Our events can be physically easy, physically moderate, and physically strenuous. They're family friendly, and also some are offered in Spanish. The locations in which we'll be working are the Jess Weaver or No Name Trail. Our first community project in the burn area will be located there on May 22nd. For National Trails Day on June 5th, we'll have a community project at Grizzly Creek. And for National Public Lands Day, we'll have a community project at Hanging Lake. Even today, we had groups already working in the canyon. Engel and Volkers organized about 50 of their employees to join us at the Grizzly Creek drainage this morning for a group project. And so we'll have groups up and down the burn area all throughout the project season. Next slide, please. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone might have once all of our other presenters are done presenting, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to the next person.
Thanks, Jacob. I believe that it's me going next. So hello, everyone that we have with us tonight and anyone watching this recording later. My name is Brianna Starbuck. I'm the Public Information Officer for the City of Glenwood Springs, and I am so excited to be having this opportunity to speak with the community tonight. While Lisa has a chance to pull up our slides, wanted to echo a little bit of what Jacob said. Recovery is a long process. And there's a saying, if you will, that recovery begins with response. So always want to throw a quick thank you out there to our first responders and our firefighters for their efforts in extinguishing this fire and keeping our community protected last year, and our elected officials for helping us to go after some funding for important projects that I will speak to a little bit here later. Next slide. I also would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to quickly remind everyone that the number one thing that you can do in terms of being fire prepared is to sign up and make sure that your account is updated for our local county alerts system. You can register or update your account now. And if you have a separate device, I encourage you to right now go ahead and pull it up on your phones, www.garco911.com. And then through that page, you're able to sign up for alerts. You can sign up for email and or text alerts. And from there, you will, anytime there's any sort of incident, whether that's a fire or a major road closure, that's going to be a great source to get information. So highly encourage you to do that. And also, if you're a Facebook person, checking in on our Glenwood Springs Fire Facebook page. They also are great for information, particularly if you live or work in Glenwood Springs. Next slide. Also wanted to speak a little bit about what our fire department regularly does as part of sort of our response to fires. So our responders and members receive regular training. They are out there, it feels like very often, getting training and making sure that they are prepared at any moment's notice to be able to respond to fires. On the Grizzly Creek fire last year, there were some of the first there on the scene, and though it quickly went on to be a federal teams situation, our local fire department and folks were supporting that effort for a really long time. So thank you to those folks as well for their efforts, as well as ongoing things our fire department does is we have a fire prevention division of our department that provides a number of services, including inspections and educations for our local HOAs and community and commercial building owners, as well as going into the schools to help education around wildfire management. So as part of sort of the larger scheme of wildfires and preparedness, that there's a lot happening, always happening, to make sure that we're ready and getting folks in that mindset of being prepared. Next slide. So recovery. Also want to thank Jacob and his team and all of the other folks that are part of that Glenwood Canyon Restoration Alliance. It certainly takes a village to do recovery, and was recently up at Hanging Lake with a number of folks and spoke to how, you know, Hanging Lake and our canyon, there are a lot of sort of official agencies making sure that it comes together to get recovered. But I think that something that is really special about our region is how much enthusiasm there is amongst locals and community members to participate in those programs, and because we really care about our Glenwood Canyon and all of our recreational activities happening in there. So would certainly encourage everyone on this call to, if you haven't already, check out their activity schedule and see if there's an opportunity that might work for you to participate in their programs. In terms of the city of Glenwood Springs part of recovery, one of our biggest things that we've had to tackle since the fire are water infrastructure improvements. So where the fire happened is right next to two of our major water intakes. So all of that drinking water that comes to your tap and all of that is right there next to the burn scar. And if you go to the next slide, to make sure we protected our water infrastructure, we recently completed a major program, emergency program, to protect our water treatment plant and our intakes. So where the water, natural water that comes off of the mountain, enters our system, and protect that from what is called debris flows. That's essentially where the slope has been destabilized, and instead of sort of soil coming down and knocking out our systems, we've set that up to be stronger, to be fortified for when we have really heavy rainwater events. It doesn't come through and completely knock out part of our water system. You can see here on the left, we've got a photo of some of the helicopter work. So where our intake is up a narrow, tiny little roads, and so having to fly in some equipment. We had our contractor, Gold Construction, was carrying buckets up the road of concrete, since you can't drive a concrete truck up there. You can see here photos of our No Name and Grizzly Creek intake. Here in the middle, you see a before and after of a hand-carved tunnel, actually, that has completely all new stainless steel mechanisms for us to be able to best handle and make sure our water is clean and safe. And on the right is a fabulous picture inside of our water treatment plant, which has recently been outfitted with all new water treatment mechanisms. What does this mean for you as a community? It means that the city of Glenwood Springs was really, really cognizant and thoughtful to make sure that we did everything we can to make sure that we're able to continue to provide safe and clean water for all of our residents and businesses. Next slide. Another big part of what the city of Glenwood Springs has done is sort of large planning efforts. So I believe Liz Velasco is on the phone with us, and she is just an amazing community member. But she has recently, her company has recently been engaged for, if we need to get fire information out quickly, we're able to have that added capacity to make sure that we're able to distribute information in English and in Spanish as quickly as we can. We know that in situations like this, it can sometimes be life or death. So making sure that we're able to get to our Spanish-speaking community as soon as possible. Staff across the city is also actively reviewing emergency evacuation routes to see what we can do to make those more efficient. How can we set ourselves up to make sure that if we needed to evacuate any sort of an area, folks would be able to get out expediently. And one of the other things that we are working on is of one of those evacuation routes is really actively seeking grant funding for fire safety initiatives and big projects, including Southbridge. So that is that big project that we're hoping to get completed on the south end of town, which would connect sort of the Cardiff 4-mile area out to 82. So instead of that lone evacuation route on Midland, adding that second route to help open up a channel to get folks out of that area if we had another incident happen out there that we needed to get folks out. Next slide. A member, a part of what we are going to do right now, or part of what we're doing now, is also preparing an outreach for fires. So that means that on the mountainside, we are making sure to cut back grass and brush, anything that sort of is kindling for fires. So our parks and recreation teams and fire departments have been going out on some of our natural areas and cutting back where it makes sense. Adding fire safety signage in our parks and trails of how to make sure that we're being fire safe in our natural areas. We have recently developed, you may have seen on social media, our One Less Spark information campaign, if you will, to remind people that it only takes one tiny little spark to cause a wildfire. And so we've gone out on our social media channels and worked with a number of partners to start and get that information out there, as well as one-on-one outreach with our school district to send kids home with some of that fire information. We are doing a lot with our community of individuals experiencing homelessness. That is a community that sometimes gets forgotten in sort of the big picture of fire preparedness. And so reaching out to them, and there's a number of activities happening in that area to make sure that they understand sort of the importance of being fire safe, how they can help us all be fire safe. And so working with them, working with that community. Our fire department, as I mentioned, does provide outreach to HOAs, community groups, property owners, informing locals of how we can prepare our personal safe spaces, so our homes, and creating what's called defensible space. That's sort of the area around your home. So if there's a fire coming near, creating that space between your home and the fire so that it is easier for responders to protect your home. So doing education one-on-one on that. And we also plan to do a door-to-door outreach campaign specific for our Spanish-speaking community. We know that there are a number of barriers for our Spanish-speaking community to be able to come into all these systems like the Garfield County 911 and tuning into our alerts and even knowing what is possible in terms of preparing yourself for fire. So we plan to go door to door and have conversations with our community, share information, but also collect information back as well. So as we develop our further communications program, we're able to hear one-on-one from folks on the ground of what we as the city can do better to best reach everyone in our community. Next slide. This is my last slide. Another thing I would be remiss if I did not share with the community. We don't officially have any fire restrictions right now per se, but a reminder that the use of fireworks is prohibited in Glenwood Springs and Garfield County until November 1st. So thinking back to that One Less Spark campaign, remember that if you are not careful, one spark can create a fire. And so in our efforts to prevent that, the use of fireworks is prohibited in town. Next slide. And with that, just wanted to offer up anyone on the call tonight. I'm looking forward to answering any questions for folks watching later. Here's my direct contact information. My Spanish is not great, but certainly if you reach out to me via email or call me in English or Spanish, I will get back to you with answers to your questions, or if you have ideas or anything like that. Look forward to hearing from you and hearing from the rest of our presenters. And with that, I will kick it back to the library and everyone else. And I think we were saying Brad next, I think.
Thank you, Brianna. I believe that is correct. First off, I'd like to thank Josh and Alex and Lisa with the library for putting this together so that we could talk to the community. Obviously, from Excel's perspective, the Grizzly Creek fire was tragic on multiple levels. And from our perspective, obviously, our job is to make sure that we're providing dependable energy to our customers, and at the same time, protecting the community in the area around us when something tragic and catastrophic like a wildfire breaks out. I am very blessed, and so is our audience this evening, to have Jody Niemczek, our manager of the Enterprise Preparedness Division with Xcel Energy, available online to be able to walk us through this presentation and talk from an expert's point of view. And so, Jody, if you are ready, I'm going to hand this off to you so that we can hear an expert talk about Xcel Energy and our wildfire mitigation updates and go from there. So Jody, are you ready?
I am.
All right, the floor is yours. Thank you, my friend.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Perfect, thank you. So I apologize for not hopping on camera. I have super slow internet where I live. So I'm Jody Niemczek. I am the Emergency Preparedness Manager for Xcel Energy. So I'm responsible for writing emergency plans for our enterprise, across all 8 states that we operate. And, I'll just say Colorado is one of our biggest concerns for wildfire, of course. So 2020 was the first year we piloted our wildfire response planning and procedures in Colorado. And, I think we all are familiar that with that Field of Dreams comment, like if you build it, they will come. So 2020 did come with wildfire, and it tested our planning efforts to the max. We monitored over 144 wildfires just in our service territory in Colorado. 6 wildfires impacted Xcel Energy across Colorado last year. I'll just say, like, for it being the year to pilot wildfire planning and preparedness, we certainly came out of it learning a lot. We have been responding to storms for forever, and we're really good and methodical about responding to emergencies. But as we all have come to learn, wildfire is a completely different animal. I'm sorry, just go ahead and go to the next slide. This is what I'm going to talk about a little bit today. 2020 wildfire season impacts, kind of that bigger picture. Our Xcel Energy wildfire prevention initiatives, we are spending a lot of energy ensuring that our assets don't start fires. And then we're also spending a lot of energy in preparedness and response and partnering with our community because, I think we've all learned through the fire season that no one approaches this alone. We're one community when we get together and respond to a wildfire. We need each other. That public-private partnership and the importance of relationships that are established ahead of time can't be underscored. So you can go ahead and go to the next slide. And I'm not going to bore you to death by reading this to you, but take a look at the significance in this slide. In the past for Colorado, 100,000 acre wildfire was considered just significant in size, but in the last 5 years, it's become pretty commonplace. 3 of the major 2020 Colorado fires exceeded 100,000 acres. East Troublesome nearly reached 200,000 acres. We study disaster and we learn from it. It's an iterative process. And, this is a good indication that we're just, the environment is growing riskier all the time. Again, to, reiterate what was said, a single spark, regardless of the ignition source, under these conductive conditions, red flag warning days, high heat, high temperature, they turn into these large, really damaging wildfires quickly. So at one point in 2020, we had 4 fires burning simultaneously in our service territory, which, it's every fire is incredibly important because it impacts, the human impact, of course. And so, to talk about the Grizzly Creek fire in the context of what went on in Colorado, the worst fire season really in our recorded history. As Xcel Energy, the stats are at the bottom: $2.5 million to distribution and transmission. The customer impacts, they're all human impacts at the end of the day. As we talk about fire mitigation and fire planning in the next slides, you can talk about dollar amounts, but it pales in comparison to the impacts. So you can move to the next slide, and I think these slides will be made available after today for you guys to look through those statistics we provided. So, one of the things, we've all paid attention to what happened in California with the Camp Fire and, just the Santa Ana winds and how they drive these enormous wildfires. And, the utility responsibilities are really about preventing our assets and preventing them from sparking and starting a fire. I mean, that's what the key to utility prevention is about. Enhancing best practices, and hardening our assets. We recognize that this poses such a significant threat to our communities and our land. We are an environmental company, and we proactively take steps to really do our very best to minimize ignition. We're investing throughout Colorado in our mitigation, and we have a team that's working to ensure that the risks of our equipment caused fires are really reduced as much as possible. So, our company first launched its mitigation program in 2018, and today we have this large cross-functional team to identify and quantify risks. And so we're taking the lead in developing and executing plans on reducing all risk, which includes, line inspections and above ground inspections and, infrared inspections to our transmission lines that we completed wholly in 2019, but we just continue to work on distribution and wind loading, similar strategies to what was mentioned before, defensible space around our poles and vegetation management that, I'm a homeowner. I never like my trees trimmed, but, at the same time, this is the small steps we take as individuals that matter to the community, right? So, our vegetation management practices, our wind strengthening practices across transmission and distribution. This just allows us to prioritize safety and maintenance to our most at-risk areas. We include pole and wire replacement. And in 2021, we're focusing on, the replacement of a lot of poles based on, the science behind wind loading and analysis. So again, being part of the proactive prevention, similar to this, to Brianna before, like this is all about limiting risk. And then when we can't limit risk, coming together and working as a public-private partnership to respond. So let's go to the next slide, because really the intent of this is to talk about what we've learned as an organization. Because, laughingly, crisis managers, we say, don't waste a good crisis. And really what that means is learn from it, move ahead with that knowledge and what you want to bring forward into what you'll do different the next time. So, I'll say from the Xcel Energy perspective, we had so much learning last year in the 6 fires we respond to, but the biggest of all was about community and about how you partner ahead of time, right? It is the wrong time to put numbers in your phone when the crisis is occurring. It's the wrong time to reach across the aisle to the emergency planning team for incident command, while the fire is occurring. Those relationships ahead of crisis are vital to a common operating picture and being good partners in response. So, I'll just say one of the big takeaways from the Grizzly Creek fire was how to work with our incident command and fire partners on so many levels. I'll just mention like the highway closure, I-70, we needed it to stay closed to fly in and do rapid repair. We needed to ensure that our staff was going into the burn areas and not becoming part of the evacuation problem, right? This whole integrated response and following command and really understanding how events are led is vital to, not becoming part of the evacuation problem and ensuring that those gas assets are shut off and, we're protecting our communities, electricity supply by moving power when we can. So really, the biggest takeaway was relationships matter, ahead of time and to really spend more time culturing those and practicing through drills. We also learned that, as Xcel Energy, we're not fire experts, we're electricity experts. And, we have to rely on those partners on the ground that have the fire experience to help us get into the burn locations. And, and part of that relationship is we have assets that we can reciprocate with, right? We have a fleet of drone technicians and pilots. We had the ability to support after the fire to look for hot spots and, look for damage assessment with our drone technology. And that is, it's the best of who we are when we lean in and trade assets and all give, what we can to the cause. And so, building those partnerships that ahead of the restoration, we have those permits in place to help support, look for hotspots. And, we can also use our assets to move the community initiative forward. So again, back to those relationships. We want to ensure that we reciprocate and make tools available to the incident command. And, I'll also say one of the great learnings for me was there's a gap in emergency response knowledge about electrical power and gas and how first responders interact with our assets. We have to support the technical lift of those first responders to ensure that they're safe around our assets. So one of the things we're launching in 2021 is an Electricity 101 for first response communities. So they know how to be safe around our assets. Again, the biggest takeaway was the significance of partnerships. And like I said earlier, we're not fire experts. So we have partnered with the Forest Service Guild in 2020 after the series of fires that we just harvested pages and pages of learning. So we partnered with the Forest Service Guild who, they train wildfire fighters. They're really a subject matter expert nonprofit. And we asked them to do a gap assessment of our performance in each of the wildfires across Colorado so we could hear real feedback about how we get better as a partner, and they came back with, some significant lessons learned and actionable steps, what we can do to be a better partner to the fire community. So one of those things, was an internal ask to provide training to our staff about how to interact with incident command so that we are an asset, not a liability when the time comes. So we've done just-in-time training for the 2021 fire season for our first responders so they interact well with incident command. And we've also given them Fire Safety 101 because, at the end of the day, we are how we care for people. So looking at the 2021 fire season, it has all of the makings so far to look like a very potentially risky season. And, we feel poised like we've learned from last year, but we also know that, every crisis is a learning event. And we just are going to keep pushing the initiative on collaboration forward as a company, because, at the end of the day, it's the public-private partnerships that get us through these events. So that's all I really have prepared. My name again, Jody Nemchek. My email is there. you know, one of the things that I'm really grateful to get to participate in is in that relationship building across the partnerships. And so keep my name if you have any questions, if you would like to do any sort of conversation with Xcel Energy around how we partner and how we prepare, you know, don't hesitate to shoot me an email.
All right, thanks very much, Jody and Brad. And I'll turn it over to Paula from the Middle Colorado Watershed Council.
Thank you, Jacob. Appreciate it. Hi, I'm with the Middle Colorado Watershed Council, and we have been working with Jacob and the Glenwood Canyon Restoration Alliance group since the beginning, when Roaring Fork Outdoor Volunteers put this together and started this partnership with everybody. And we've been happy to participate. And we're also working on some things that overlap with what the Restoration Alliance is doing, and in particular to what we can help out with most. And that's kind of following what our mission is. Our mission is to work with our stakeholders in the Middle Colorado River to evaluate and protect and enhance our watershed. And we look at this watershed for the Middle Colorado, starting from the east end of Glenwood Canyon and going all the way to Tibet Canyon. So a lot of Garfield County, but we overlap a little bit into Mesa County. And so this watershed was impacted by 2 fires, actually, both Grizzly Creek and then Pine Gulch on the other side of the county. So we've been doing a little bit of work on both sides. If you could go to the next slide, thanks. One of the things that we've done over the last 3 years prior to the fire, it kind of sounds a little bit like Jody, is we've been working on an integrated stream management plan, and that management plan incorporated the 4 basic needs of different stakeholders in this environment. So we were speaking with municipalities and the agricultural community as a consumer group. We were looking at water quality. We were looking at recreation. We were looking at habitat and aquatics. And part of the decision when we put that plan together and wrapped it up last year included also what we could do for post-fire collaborative efforts. And actually now, the discussion nowadays is also pre-fire. What can we do to be prepared and to mitigate against a potential fire coming in and make it not as disastrous once it does hit our communities. And I heard Jody speak to that as well, which was, I think, all of it in all of our minds. I look at the city of Glenwood now and the work they're doing for evacuation plans and just preparing ahead of time in case something happens again. And I applaud those efforts. So this is one of our, this collaborative post-fire watershed management is one of our many goals. We have 55 of them actually. And so we dove right in and said, well, how can we implement what we need to do to take care of this watershed? Next slide, please. So this is the burn area of the Grizzly Creek fire. And one of the first things that we looked at is how do we take care of what's going to come with precipitation. And one of the first projects that we dove into in the winter this year was how do we check for what the water quality is? So we wanted to get enhanced water quality monitoring, and we wanted to set up a downstream alert system in regard to that water quality monitoring. Next slide, please. When we look at the post-fire impacts, the things that we're concerned about are, number one, health and safety of citizens. All of us are. What about our buildings and infrastructure? What could happen if we should have a flood or a debris flow that Brianna had mentioned earlier? What about our public water systems? How is that going to impact them? What about our agricultural community? If we get a debris flow, is that going to affect the ditches or even head gates where our agricultural community pulls water off of our Colorado River? So we we looked at those and we looked at the objectives that we needed. That was safe drinking water, number one, obviously, as far as for our water systems. And when I spoke to all the communities, not only Glenwood Springs, but from Glenwood down to DeBeck, all of them were concerned because they all pool a good portion of their water off of the Colorado River. So that was something that we wanted to make sure that we were getting them the information that they needed, so that if they need to shut down an intake just for a temporary 1 day or 2 hours or however long that would take, just to watch a debris flow go by or a change in water quality, that they were prepared to do that. So we talked to them about shutting down intakes. We talked to them about, did they have enough water in tank storage and how long would that last? And every community had a different story as far as that went. So we're trying to keep that communication network going. In any emergency response and reaction and putting things in place for protecting your future, you always want to look at resilience and redundancy. You want to say, if I take care of it from this angle, am I also taking care of it from that angle, so that if one fails, we're ready to jump over to that alternative option. So when we were making these discussions with our public work directors, and then also reaching out to the agriculture community, we kept asking, what if we do this or what if we do that? And the big thing came to, well, what is going to come downstream? Next slide, please. So we wanted to set up an enhanced water sampling, and we were lucky to partner with the Colorado Rural Water Association to have some of these conversations with the Colorado River District and USGS to figure out how to set this up and what we needed to do. What we wanted to do, and if you go to the next slide, is we worked with the Grizzly Creek, we worked with the USGS, and I forgot this slide kind of rotates through, so you have to click through with me as we go. But what we wanted to do is we set up 4 sampling sites, discrete sampling sites, to check water quality as it changes with precipitation. We started with a baseline. I think you might have to click forward one. Sorry. On the slide, was that working? There we go. So we picked 4 locations and to say, we want some discrete water sampling, so that if we check this as a baseline before spring runoff, if we check it again during spring runoff, if we check it again during the summer, or if we have a monsoon event, then we can start checking for the different qualities in that water. The fires have the potential to increase erosion of geologic materials that could impact impact the quality of the water as it's coming in. And the things we're looking at is sediment, possibly fire retardants, nutrients that change in the water, organic material, the salinity of the water. So we're looking for all of those things when we do these samplings at these different points. We're also doing some continuous sampling. If you'll push forward one more on this. The USGS has these sensor deployments in the Colorado River, and they've worked with NGWAS as well to enhance those, so that we're able to see a recording of how the water changes every 15 minutes. Both of these things are going to be combined together to get into the alert system that USGS provides, so that our water providers in our town can set up an alert system and be able to quickly hear if the quality of water is going to change before it hits their intake system, so that they can prepare for it and do some pre-mitigation as well as it's changing. So that was a huge goal for us to get this in place before even runoff started. So we were working as quickly as possible to get some funding, and luckily we were able to work with the Colorado River District, who came in with some partnership funding to match the USGS and put this all in place. And right now we're starting the sampling. We have a couple of places that we're going to also, we have one more place that we're going to put one more sensor deployment, but we feel pretty solid now that we're going to get the information we need so that we have this alert system in place for our downstream users. which include not only Glenwood, and we've done some stuff with extra locations there with Veltus Park and stuff like that, but not only Glenwood, but we're also talking about Newcastle and Silt and Rifle, the Battlement Mesa Metro District, Parachute, and DeBeck will all be able to access this information to know what's coming downstream. Next slide, please. Second part of what we were looking at recently is, well, how do we know what's coming as far as weather goes? And I have to say, there's a great alert system set up already. And I've been through a couple of the seminars that the city of Glenwood has done with CDOT and the work they've put in place to monitor weather that's coming in so that the canyon is ready. If we have to shut it down, if we have to evacuate people, if there are precipitation events that cause flooding or a debris flow to come through one of these burned areas. The map that you're looking at shows the heavily burned areas in red and dark red, and those would be most likely to have something quickly come off the hillside and get into causing a problem with debris flow, as Brianna had mentioned earlier, or even flooding, and we want to be aware of that before it hits. So there is a system in place, there is radar from the National Weather Service, but in our discussions with CDOT and with NOAA, it turned out that earlier in the discussions, there had been a wish to increase the rain gauges around the perimeter of the canyon. So one of the projects that we have been working on in the last month and a half is to get those rain gauges so we can put them in place. And the intent is that we'll be able to more quickly see what might be coming from different directions. Next slide, please. So when you look at this map, this kind of gives you a quick view of those desired locations of where those rain gauges would go. And along the middle of that, there are some Grizzly CDOT numbers. Those CDOT 1, CDOT 2, and CDOT 3 are where the CDOT already has some gauges in place along the highway within the canyon, and they are enhancing those so that they have rain gauges on them as well. But if you look along the perimeter there, where we look at RG Grizzly 1, RG Grizzly 2, Alt 3, Grizzly 3, and 4 and 5, those are higher up. And what we're looking at there is if we could put gauges in those places, we'll be able to see weather that is coming in a little more easily so that we can transmit that information back to NOAA, and NOAA can quickly turn it around and tell us what's coming our way as far as storm warnings or storm watches to be better prepared for that. CDOT was able to get the funding to put 2 of those in place, and the funding we're looking for is for the extra 3 locations. One up by Windy Point at our Grizzly 1, one on the south east side, sorry, on the south west side of the canyon to watch what weather might be coming up from the south, and then even on the east side of the canyon to see what might be a backup storm coming in. That is a project right now that we're trying to get funding for from the post-recovery fire money that the state has, and our fingers are crossed that will come through, and we should know pretty quickly because we do want those in place before our summer monsoons hit. Next slide, please. So as I said, we've been working in partnership with many people. One who has helped us through many of these conversations and the technical side of things, which has helped me out a lot, is the Colorado Rural Water Association. Next slide, please. And a huge partner is the Colorado River District. And as I mentioned earlier, their funding for the water quality monitoring project that we're doing allowed us to quickly put that in place and start getting the gauging that we needed for water quality monitoring so that we'd be ready for runoff and for what might come next, and we can protect our downstream communities. Next slide, please. This is just a list of the many people that we've been working with as we've gone through this. I have to tell you, the partnerships in post-fire restoration efforts is amazing. Every conversation I have, I realize how hard everybody's working to protect our communities and to turn this around and restore, not to what we had before, but to restore to the point that we're going to be safe and we're going to be healthy and we're going to take care of each other. And on that note, with the next slide, this is my contact information if you wanted to have additional information on what I've talked about. But all I can really do right now is to encourage you to join the Glenwood Canyon Restoration Alliance and the efforts that they're doing. There's so many community projects that people can be engaged in. The trail work that's coming up that Jacob had mentioned at the beginning, at the end of May and early June for No Name and for Grizzly Creek, and then later in the summer for Hanging Lake. If each of us put our backs into this, I think we're going to come out okay from this particular fire. Thank you. And I think Elise is next from CDOT, so she can go further.
Elise, you're muted.
Well, I guess I should unmute myself. That would probably be helpful for everyone to be able to hear me. Sorry about that. So my name's Elise Thatcher, and I'm the Northwestern Colorado Communications Manager for CDOT. That's the Colorado Department of Transportation. Thank you, Lisa, for your help with these slides tonight. And I'm going to try and speak at a measured pace for our hardworking translators who have been assisting us tonight. So next slide, please. Thank you. Our work in Glenwood Canyon immediately in response to the Grizzly Creek fire have included these main categories. That's ecological restoration, specifically shredded wood straw mulch. That's been along 29 acres of burned soil in the canyon within the I-70 right-of-way. Also infrastructure repairs to pavement, concrete barrier, electrical and fiber optic conduit wiring, and the recreation path. And as many of you know, we've also done a lot of work repairing rock fall fences and putting in new ones. That has impacted more of you than usual this week, I think, because we had some stops in Glenwood Canyon to traffic on I-70 in order to allow for helicopter operations for installing those fences. So thank you for your patience. Next slide, please. Briefly, I'm going to explain what the Canyon Safety Closure Protocol is. We've heard a lot of great information tonight about the hard work that's been taking place immediately after the fire. I'm sorry, immediately after the highway closure last August 2020. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about safety closures, how they'll work, and then I'll hand it back to our host. So we're looking at the canyon, a quick overview, again, as many of you are familiar with. Next slide, please. So in the event of moderate, heavy, or extreme rain in the canyon, there is a likelihood of debris flow coming down from the Grizzly Creek fire burn scar. So we have a safety closure plan in place to make sure that we're keeping motorists safe and folks recreating in the canyon safe if there's rain in the forecast. I should say that we put together this safety closure plan in partnership with stakeholders from around the canyon area, including the Roaring Fork Valley and the Eagle County communities. So essentially what it comes down to is if there's rain in the forecast, be sure to check COTRIP regularly. That's COTRIP.org. And any closures for the rest areas and the bike path will be posted there. I mentioned those first because if there is a certain amount of rainfall in the forecast, we will likely close the rest areas and bike path the day before that weather is in the forecast. or I should say the day before that weather is expected. That's because clearing the canyon is much, much faster and safer if we have everybody in their cars and not on the recreation path and not at the rest areas. It's just faster to keep folks moving or to clear them out of the canyon if they're already in their vehicles. So if we have a closure that starts the afternoon or evening before, that information will be posted on CoTrip. And we will also be alerting local stakeholders, so emergency services, law enforcement, and others, so they're aware of the steps that are being taken. Please know that if there is a closure of the rest areas in the bike path, it doesn't mean there's definitely going to be a closure of I-70. It just means we're at the point where we need to take that step in preparation should the weather get to that point the next day. Next slide, please. So when is there actually a closure of I-70 in Glenwood Canyon? If there is a flash flood watch, then CDOT will be on standby with both crews and heavy equipment monitoring the canyon. And at that point, if the rest areas and recreation path have not closed yet, they will be closed at that time. If there is a flash flood warning, that is when I-70 will be closed. I'll talk about the closure points in a hot moment here. And if the rest areas and recreation path have been open, so if this is a very quick escalation of the weather forecast, they will be also closed at the time of the warning if they haven't been already. Next slide, please. So I should mention during a closure, CDOT will be, after evacuating the canyon, we'll be monitoring to see whether any debris flow comes down onto the roadway. Okay, so where's the highway going to be closed? On the Eagle County side for westbound traffic, we will have the closure point at 133, exit 133, that you see here on the slides. That's at Dot Cerro. We do have commercial freight or CMV parking there. Next slide, please. On the Garfield County side, we're going to have two locations where closure goes into place. And we're going to do it as close to at the same time as possible. So the first is at exit 116. This is the main Glenwood Springs exit, which you're looking at now. Next slide, please. And the second location will be at exit 109 or Canyon Creek. This is so that we can quickly clear I-70 between 109 and the 116, so that stretch of I-70 is as clear as possible for emergency services and law enforcement. Please note that we are making it so that, or the plan is such that folks who are coming from, Grand Junction, other points further west, if you're coming home to the Roaring Fork Valley, and there is a closure in place at the 109 and exit 116, there will be an arrangement in place for you to be able to get to Glenwood Springs past exit 109. Plan for delays. It's not going to be a speedy trip returning home because, there will be a system in place to make sure we or the other agencies who are managing the closure are letting the right folks through. So be sure to still plan for delays. Next slide, please. If there is a closure that lasts longer than 2 hours or is anticipated to last longer than 2 hours, this is the alternate route that we strongly recommend you take. You may notice this is very different from last year. Last year we said go south. This year, go north. So this is Highway 13 from Rifle to US 40, from Craig down to Kremling, and then south on Highway 9 down to Silverthorne, where you rejoin I-70. Same in reverse if you're coming from Denver or other points east. Big reason for why we're recommending that folks take this northern route is because to the south, there's major closures for a construction project. So we don't want to send you that way. stay north, and your trip will be a little easier than going south. A lot easier, I should say. One last thing to note, as many of you know, we strongly ask that you not take an alternate route over Hagerman Pass, Cottonwood, other roads in the area that are rough roads, may need four-wheel drive capabilities or just can't handle heavy traffic. Please know that if you decide you may want to try one of those routes, it's likely you'll encounter a local closure. And if you don't, you may end up on a road that you're not terribly familiar with a vehicle that's not prepared. And being stuck without cell service in a rural area is guaranteed to take longer than taking the alternate route. So we want to set everybody up for a safe trip in the event of a closure. And that's all from me. I'm going to put my contact info in the, oh, I'm being reminded that I've got one more slide. So as I mentioned at the beginning, you want to check CoTrip for any alerts. That'll be for the rest area or rec path closures, and certainly in the event of an actual closure of I-70. Have a plan, know that alternate route, make sure your vehicle's ready to be on the road and have a safe trip. If it's raining or snowing, as it sometimes does in the summer, make sure you're driving slowly, paying attention to conditions. And if you do encounter water on the road or other conditions where you feel unsafe, always stay in your vehicle. I'm going to put my contact info in the chat. Please do reach out if you have any questions, and I'll hand it back to Jacob.
Great. Thank you so much, Elise, and thank you to all of our presenters this evening. Before we turn it over to any questions that anyone might have, I do want to make the time right now to announce that Roaring Fork Outdoor Volunteers, on behalf of the Glenwood Canyon Alliance, is launching this evening a $100,000 fundraising campaign for the purpose of our restoration efforts in Glenwood Canyon, not just in 2021, but for years to come. Our restoration efforts, again, are focused on building community, educating the community, and bringing the community together in on-the-ground restoration efforts. And with some exciting news to add to our fundraising effort, I'd like to invite Teddy from the Western Colorado Community Foundation to speak briefly.
Oh, hi. Thank you, Jacob. I am pleased to be here representing the Western Colorado Community Foundation. We were thrilled and just amazing to hear the presentations tonight of everything everybody is doing towards this effort. And we are thrilled to be able to offer a $20,000 grant towards this goal. We have donors that care passionately about helping and supporting and educating, and we know the great work of the Roaring Fork Outdoor Volunteers, and now this coalition, and really see that it's so necessary. So we're just very pleased to support with that $20,000 grant for the Alliance, and then specifically for the Stewards program, and the Adventure Stewards, and to be able for Roaring Fork Outdoor Volunteers to be able to expand that. So thank you for all of the critical work that you do, and we look forward to just continuing to support this effort.
Thanks very much, Teddy, and we're grateful for your support and for the support of our entire community. We're hopeful that we can meet our $100,000 fundraising goal by the 20th of June. We've had a lot of institutional and foundational support from the get-go, but we ultimately do rely upon community members. And so you can find a place to donate on our website, which is rfov.org/donate. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it back to Alex for the Q&A.
Great. Thank you, everybody. That was a great presentation from everybody, all of our panelists. I know we're running a little over our schedule, so we have one question that came in, and that came in for you, Jacob. The question is, how are you working to engage our Latino community in your efforts?
I think that's a great question. And I will just say that I am tall, white, male, and bearded. And so I fit the stereotype of someone who swings a pickaxe for 6 hours on a Saturday afternoon. But certainly we try to create opportunities for all ages, abilities, and backgrounds. And some of the work that we're doing is relatively simple and straightforward, like creating bilingual signage. But I will add that most academic studies show that almost everyone ignores signage, whether it's in English or Spanish. So we need to think beyond that and about actual engagement of the community. Some of our community projects will have people on site like myself who are fluent in English and Spanish and can offer opportunities that are bilingual. More than that, we recognize that Roaring Fork Outdoor Volunteers, and I would imagine many of the organizations on the call here tonight, are specialists in their own fields. And so therefore, we ought to leverage the specialties of organizations that work directly with the Latino or Spanish-speaking community. And so on the behalf of the Glenwood Canyon Restoration Alliance, I'm trying to work more actively with specific Spanish or Latino community organizations to best understand what their membership and what their community would like to see and how they can be engaged in the burn area restoration, helping create opportunities specific for them, and then thinking also about the long term, about how they can best be engaged in the next 7 to 10 years of the restoration process.
Thank you. We will wait a couple of minutes to see if there's any other questions. In the meantime, if somebody does want to volunteer or help out, would you mind typing in the chat where the best place to find answers to those questions would be? Thank you, Jacob. I do have another question. Are the Glenwood Springs municipal water intakes in No Name and Grizzly Creek watersheds within the fire perimeter or upstream of the perimeter boundary?
This is a great question, and I don't know exactly where the intakes fall within, other than from the intakes, you can see the burn scar. And so Paula might be able to speak a little bit more specifically about where our intakes fall. But I can say that our intakes, both the No Name and Grizzly Creek intakes, have, through that emergency project, been protected against sort of any sort of big debris flow event that might happen as a result of the burn scar.
I do know on the Grizzly Creek drainage, the fire is stopped below that intake, so we're protected there. I think on the No Name, like Brianna said, the work that they've done to protect what might be coming down should be sufficient, but I can't remember. I think on that it's like the burn on the No Name drainage is on one side, more so than the other side. So, but I don't think that it's going to be impacted by debris flow above. What we're more concerned about, and Brianna, maybe you can confirm this, is what might come down and all the work that was done at the bottom of the No Name drainage. And that was well protected, I believe, with some work with EWP money and things to get the debris to flow a certain direction.
And that sounds about right to me, Paula. I don't think that our intakes are necessarily like inside the area where it burned, but whenever there's a big fire like that, it destabilizes sort of all the soil, and it's all connected, if you will. And so even though it might not be right inside where it happens, it's certainly that risk then becomes part of the equation of if things do flow then down into the intakes. But the good news is that there was a lot of work that happened to protect that, to make sure. And I believe that it was Paula that mentioned that it's not just our water system here in Glenwood that we're protecting with those projects, but those intakes serve communities downstream as well. So there's a lot of importance to those projects.
And one other component to that, there is the no name community down at the bottom of that drainage. And I did speak with them, and because they have a water system themselves, they pull some of the water out of where Glenwood gets theirs, but they have some well systems, and they've done, they've checked and made sure that they are going to be okay in case of a debris flow or something like that that should come down.
Okay, thank you very much. I think if we have no more questions, we can go ahead and go home for the evening, or if you're home, I guess, relax. But it was a great presentation. I really appreciate everybody's efforts in this. And thank you so much for involving the library. We would love to continue to work with everybody in these efforts. And thank you for everybody who attended today. These are being recorded and they will be posted to the library's Facebook and will be sent to Roaring Fork volunteers as soon as the videos are ready. If you would like access to the videos, just visit the wrong library, Garfield Library's Facebook. It should be a couple of days, maybe next week, those videos will be ready. Thank you again, everybody, and have a great night.